Hello. We are live. Are we? Yes. Okay. Welcome. Welcome to Tuesday Tales of Terror. I decided to turn the camera around the other way because I thought to myself, I have an interesting room. I have interesting things. So just stare at a boring wall. Not I. That's for certain. Okay, where are we? We're in chapter 21, and we have said goodbye to all of the minions, except I believe Rictus is still around. So, here we are. Chapter 21, Tricks and Temptations. And it's this picture of this mountain cat of some sort. Yes. And it says, alas, a compass and a fountain, all kinds of things. Tricks and temptations. Hydrate. I feel like this is too bright. Does it go brighter? Is it actually better? Let's hang out. You've done well, said the smiling face awaiting him at the top of the stairs. I'd wondered where you'd gone to, Harvey said to Rictus. Always ready to serve, came the unctuous reply. Really, said Harvey, stepping down off the chair and approaching the creature. Of course, said Rictus. Always. Now that he was closer to the man, Harvey saw the cracks in his veneer. He was plastering on a smile and smothering his words in butter and honey, but it was the sour smell of fear that oozed from his sickly skin. You're afraid of me, aren't you? Harvey said. No, Rictus insisted. I'm respectful, that's all. Mr. Hood thinks you're a bright boy. He's instructed me to offer you whatever you want to make you stay. He spread his arms. The sky's the limit. You know what I want. Anything but the years, thief. You can't have those. You won't even need them if you stay and become Mr. Hood's apprentice. You'll live forever, just like him. He dabbed at the sweat beads on his upper lip with the yellow handkerchief. Think about it, he said. You might be able to kill the likes of Karna or me, but you'll never hurt Hood. He's too old, too wise, too dead. If I stayed, Harvey said. Rictus's grin spread. Yes? Would the children in the lake go free? Why bother about them? Because one of them was my friend, Harvey reminded him. You're thinking of little Lulu, aren't you? Rictus said. Well, let me tell you, she's very happy down there. They all are. No, they're not, Harvey raged. The lake's foul, and you know it. He took a step toward Rictus, who retreated as if in fear of his life, which perhaps he was. How would you like it? Harvey said, stabbing his finger in Rictus's direction. Living in the cold and the dark? You're right, said Rictus, raising his hands in surrender. Whatever you say. I say set them free, now, Harvey replied. And if you won't, then I will. He pushed Rictus aside and started down the stairs, 2 at a time. He didn't have a clue what he was going to do when he got down to the lake. Fish were fish, after all, even if they'd once been children. If he tried to take them out of the lake, they'd surely drown in the air, but he was determined to somehow save them from Hood. Rictus came after him down the flight, chattering like a clockwork salesman. What do you want? He said. Just imagine it, and it's yours. How about your own motorcycle? As he spoke, something gleamed on the landing below, and the sleekest motorcycle human eyes had ever seen rolled into view. It's yours, my boy, Rictus said. No thanks, Harvey said. I don't blame you, Rictus said, kicking the motorcycle over as he sailed past it. How about books? Do you like books? Before Harvey could reply, the wall in front of him lifted like a great brick curtain, revealing shelf upon shelf of leather-bound volumes. The masterpieces of the world, Rictus said. From Aristotle to Zola. No, no, said Harvey, hurrying on. There's got to be something you want, Rictus said. They were heading toward the final flight of stairs now, and Rictus knew he didn't have very long before his prey was out in the open air. You like dogs? Rictus said as a litter of yapping pups scampered up the stairs. Pick one. Hell, have 'em all. Harvey was tempted, but he stepped over them and on. Something more exotic, maybe, Rictus said, as a flock of brilliantly feathered parrots descended from the ceiling. Harvey waved them away. Oh, and here we have a parrot flying with the books Aristotle and Zola. Very beautiful. Some stars. Too noisy, huh? Said Rictus. You want something quiet and powerful. Tigers! That's what you want. Tigers! No sooner said than they padded into view in the hallway below. 2 white tigers with eyes like polished gold. Nowhere to keep 'em, Harvey said. That's practical, Rictus conceded. I like a practical kid. As the tigers bounded off, the telephone on the table beside the kitchen door began to ring. Rictus was down the flight in 2 springs and at the table in another 2. Listen to this, he said. It's the president. He wants to give you a medal. No, he doesn't, Harvey said, tiring of this rigmarole now. He was at the bottom of the stairs and crossing to the front door. You're right, said Rictus, ear to the phone. He wants to give you an oil field in Alaska. Harvey kept walking. No, I got that wrong. He wants to give you Alaska. Too cold. Same. He says, how about Florida? Too hot. Boy, you're a difficult guy to please, Harvey Swick. Harvey ignored him and turned the handle of the front door. Rictus slammed down the phone and raced toward him. Wait up, he hollered. Wait up, I'm not done yet. You've got nothing I want, Harvey said, hauling open the door. They're all fakes. What if they are? Said Rictus, suddenly hushed. So, the sun's out there. You can still enjoy it? And let me tell you, it takes a lot of magic to conjure up all these shams and hoaxes. Mr. Hood's really sweating to find you something you like. Ignoring him, Harvey stepped out onto the porch. Mrs. Griffin was standing on the lawn with a stew cat in her arms, squinting up at the house. She smiled when she saw Harvey emerge. I heard such noises, she said. What's been going on in there? I'll tell you later, said Harvey. Where's Wendell? He's wandered off, she said. Harvey kept his hands around his mouth and yelled, Wendell! Wendell! His voice came back to him from the face of the house, but there was no reply from Wendell. It's a warm afternoon, said Rictus, idling on the porch. Maybe he went swimming. Oh, no, Harvey murmured. No, not Wendell. Please not, Wendell. Rictus shrugged. He was a goofy little kid anyhow, he said. He'll probably look better as a fish. No, Harvey yelled up at the house. This isn't fair. You can't do this. You can't. Tears started to cloud his eyes. He wiped them away with his fists. They were both useless, fists and tears. He couldn't soften Hood's heart with weeping, and he couldn't bring down the house with blows. He had no weapon against the enemy but his wits, and his wits were about at an end. Moving on. Chapter 22. Appetite. And here we have some kind of crab creature, and it is grabbing onto this little boat thing, which I think are like the little boat figurines that Harvey had and dropped into the lake. Appetite. Oh, to be a vampire again, Harvey thought. To have claws and fangs and a hunger for blood upon him, like the hunger he'd had that distant Halloween, the hunger he'd turned from in disgust. He wouldn't turn from it now. Oh, no. He'd let it swell the beast in him so he could fly in Hood's face with his hatred razor sharp. But he wasn't a beast. He was a boy. It was the vampire king who had the power, not him. And then, as he stared up at the house, he remembered something that Rictus had told him at the door. "It takes a lot of magic to conjure up these shams and houses," he said. "Mr. Hood's really sweating to find you something you like." Maybe I don't need fangs to suck him dry, Harvey thought. Maybe all I need is wishes. "I want to talk to Hood," he said to Rictus. "Why?" "Well, maybe there are some things I'd like. Only I want to tell them about them, personally." "He's listening," Rictus said, glancing back toward the house. Harvey scanned the windows and the eaves and the porch, but there was no sign of any presence. "I don't see him," he said. "Yes, you do," Rictus replied. "Is he in the house?" Harvey asked, staring through the open door. "Haven't you guessed yet?" Rictus replied. "He is the house." As he spoke, a cloud moved over the sun. The roof and walls darkened, and the entire house seemed to swell like a monstrous fungus. It was alive, from the eaves to the foundations. Alive! "Go on," Rictus said. "Speak to him. He's listening." Harvey took a step toward the house. "Can you hear me?" he said. The front door swung a little wider, and a sighing breath from the top of the stairs blew a cloud of Jive's dust out onto the porch. "He can hear you," Rictus said. "If I stay," Harvey began. "Yes," said the house, making the word from creaks and rattles. "You'll give me anything I want." "For a bright boy like you," came the reply. "Anything." "You promise? On your magic?" "I promise. I promise. Just say the word." "Well, for a start..." "Yes." "I lost my arc." "Then you must have another, my lodestar," the Hood house said. "Bigger, better." And a board of the porch folded back as an arc 3 times the size of the first one rose into view. "I don't want lead animals," Harvey said as he walked toward the steps. "What then?" said Hood. "Silver. Gold." "Flesh and blood," Harvey replied. "Perfect little animals." "I like a challenge," Hood said, and as he spoke a tinny din of bellows and roars rose from the ark, and the little windows were flung open, and the doors flung wide, and 100 animals appeared, all perfect miniatures: elephants, giraffes, hyenas, aardvarks, doves. "Satisfied," said Hood. Harvey shrugged. "It's okay, I suppose," he said. "Okay," said Hood. "It's a little miracle." "So make me another." "Another ark." "Another miracle." "What would you like?" Harvey turned his back on the Hood house and surveyed the lawn. The sight of Mrs. Griffin watching with puzzlement inspired the next request. "I want flowers," he said, "everywhere. And I don't want any 2 alike." "What for?" asked the Hood house. "You said I could have whatever I wanted," Harvey replied. You didn't say I had to give you reasons. If I have to do that, all the fun goes out of it. Oh, I wouldn't want that, the Hood House said. You must have fun at all costs. So give me the flowers, Harvey insisted. The lawn began to tremble as though a minor earthquake were underway, and the next moment countless shoots pressed up between the blades of grass. Mrs. Griffin began to laugh with delight. Look at them, she said. Just look. It was quite a show. Tens of thousands of flowers bursting into blossom at the same time. Harvey could have named a few of them if he'd been quizzed. Tulips, daffodils, roses, but most of them were new to him, species that only bloomed at night on the high Himalayas or on the wind-swept plateaus of Tierra del Fuego, flowers with blooms as big as his head or as small as his thumbnail, blooms that stank like bad meat, ginkgo biloba, or smelled like a breeze from heaven itself. Even though he knew it was all an illusion, he was impressed and said so. Ginkgo biloba actually grows on a tree, but it does smell awful, like rotting meat. I believe it's the fruit, the skins, the flesh of that. All I know is it was terrible, and it was on our shoes and on the car tires, and just a nightmare. Even though he knew it was all an illusion, he was impressed and said so. Looks good, he told the Hood House. Satisfied, it wanted to know. Was its voice a little weaker than it had been earlier? Harvey wondered. He supposed it was. He showed no sign of that suspicion, however. He simply said, We're getting there. Getting there, said the Hood House. Well, said Harvey, I guess we'll know when we arrive. A low growl of irritation came from the house, shaking the windows. One or two slates slid from the roof and smashed on the ground below. I'm going to have to be careful, Harvey thought. Hood's getting angry. Rictus echoed that thought. I hope you're not stringing Mr. Hood along, he warned, because he doesn't like that kind of game. He wants me happy, doesn't he? Harvey said. Of course. So how about something to eat? The kitchen's full, said Rictus. I don't want pies and hot dogs. I want... He paused, ransacking his memory for delicacies he'd heard about. Roast swan! And oysters, and those little black eggs. Caviar, Rictus suggested. That's it. I want caviar. Really? It's disgusting. I still want it, said Harvey. And frog's legs, and horseradish, and pomegranates. The meals were already appearing in the hallway, plate upon steaming plate. The smells were tantalizing at first, but the more dishes Harvey added to the list, the more sickly the mix became. He rapidly began to exhaust his menu of real meals, however. So instead of giving the house easy recipes like meatballs and pizzas, he started to invent dishes. I want crawfish cooked in cherry soda, and horse steaks with jelly bean sauce, and Boston cream cheese and pastrami soup. Wait, said Rictus. You're going too fast. But Harvey didn't stop. And pumpernickel stew, and snail fudge with pig's foot clusters. Wait, the house howled. This time Harvey stopped. In the heat of his invention, he hadn't even looked to see if Hood was supplying him with these eatables, but now he saw all the dishes he demanded piled so high in the hallway that they were threatening to topple and float the ark on a noxious sea of sweet meats and stews. I know what you're doing, said the Hood House. Uh-oh, Harvey thought. He's on to me. He looked up from the feast at the door to the facade and saw that his plan to drain the house of its magic was indeed working. Many of the windows were now cracked or broken. The doors were peeling and hanging from their hinges. The porch boards were twisted and blighted. You're testing me, aren't you? Said Hood. His voice had never been melodious, but it was now uglier than ever, like the rumble of the devil's belly. "Admit it, thief," he said. Harvey took a deep breath and said, "If I'm going to be your apprentice, I need to know how powerful you are." "Are you satisfied?" the decaying house demanded. "Almost," Harvey said. "What more do you want?" it roared. What more indeed, Harvey thought. His mind was reeling with these ridiculous lists. He had little left in the way of demands. "You may have one final gift," the Hood House said. "One final proof of my power. Then you must accept me as your master forever and ever. Agreed." Harvey felt a trickle of cold sweat run down his spine. He stared at the teetering house, his mind racing. What was left to demand? "Agreed," the house boomed. "Agreed," he said. "So tell me," it went on, "what do you want?" He looked at the tiny animals around the ark, and at the flowers, and at the food spewing through the door. What should he demand? One final request to break Hood's back. But what? What? A gust of chilly wind came from the direction of the lake. Autumn could not be far off. The season of dying things. "I know," he said suddenly. "Tell me," the house replied. "Tell me, and let's have this game over once and for all. I want your bright soul under my wing, little thief." "And I want the seasons," Harvey said. "All the seasons. At once." "At once?" "Yes, at once." "That's nonsensical." "It's what I want." "Stupid. Imbecilic." "It's what I want. You said one more wish, and that's it." "Very well," said the house. "I will give it to you. And when you have it, little thief, your soul is mine." Oh, and we have this strange, deranged woman with a cat, and I suppose this is Mrs. Griffin. And that is not who I pictured the entire time, but there we are. Mrs. Griffin. Chapter 23. The War of Seasons. Hood didn't waste any time. He'd no sooner made his final offer to Harvey than the balmy wind grew gusty, carrying off the lamb's wool clouds that had been drifting through the summer sky. In their place came a juggernaut, a thunderhead the size of a mountain, which loomed over the house like a shadow thrown against heaven. It had more than lightning at its dark heart. It had the light rains that came at early morning to coax forth the seeds of another spring. It had the drooping fogs of autumn, and the spiraling snows that had brought so many midnight Christmases to the house. Now all three fell at once, rains, snows, and fogs, as a chilly sleet that all but covered the sun. It would have killed the flowers on the slope with cold, had the wind not reached them first, tearing through the blossoms with such vehemence that every petal and leaf was snatched up into the air. Standing between this fragrant tide and the plummeting curtain of ice and cold, Harvey was barely able to stay upright, but he planted his feet wide apart and resisted every blast and buffet, determined not to take shelter. This spectacle might be the last he set eyes upon as a free spirit. Indeed, as a living spirit, he intended to enjoy it. It was a sight to behold, a battle the likes of which the planet had never seen. To his left, shafts of sunlight pierced the storm clouds in the name of summer, only to be smothered by autumn's fogs, while to his right spring coaxed its legions out of bough and earth, then saw its buds murdered by winter's frosts before they could show their colors. Attack after attack was mounted and repulsed. Revel and retreat sounded 100 times, but no one season was able to carry the day. It was soon impossible to distinguish defeats from victories. The rallies and the feints, the diversions and the encirclements, all became one confusion. Snows melted into rains as they fell. Rains were boiled into vapor, and sweated new shoots out through the rot of their brothers. And somewhere in the midst of this chaos, the power that had brought it about raised its voice in a rage, demanding that it cease. "Enough!" the hood house yelled. "Enough!" But its voice, which had once carried such terrible authority, had grown weak. Its orders went unnoticed, or if noticed, then disobeyed. The seasons raged on, throwing themselves against each other with rare abandon, and in passing, tearing at the house which stood in the midst of their battlefields. The walls, which had begun to teeter as Hood's power diminished, were thrown over by the raging wind. The chimneys were racked by thunder, and toppled. The lightning rods struck so many times they melted, and fell through the slateless roof in a burning rain, setting fire to every floorboard, banister, and stick of furniture they touched. The porch, pummeled by hail, was reduced to matchwood. The staircase, rocked to its foundations by the growth and the dirt around it, collapsed like a tower of cards. Squinting against the face of the storm, Harvey witnessed all of this and rejoiced. He'd come to the house hoping to steal back the years that Hood had tricked from him, but he'd never dared believe he could bring the whole edifice down. Yet here it was, failing as he watched, loud through the dins of wind, and though the dins of wind and thunder were, they couldn't drown out the sound of the house as it perished and went to dust. Every nail and sill and brick seemed to shriek at once, a cry of pain that only oblivion could comfort. Harvey was denied a glimpse of Hood's last moments. A cloud of dirt rose like a veil to cover the sight, but he knew the moment his battle with the Vampire King was over, because the warring seasons suddenly turned to peace. 1 minute! I hear you. 1 minute. The thunderhead softened its furies and dispersed. The wind dropped to an idling breeze. The fierce sun grew watery and veiled itself in mist. There was debris in the air, of course, petals and leaves, dust and ash. They fell like a dream rain, though their fall marked the end of a dream. "Oh, child," Mrs. Griffin said. Harvey turned to her. She was standing just a few yards from him, gazing up at the sky. There was a little patch of blue above their heads, the first glimpse of real sky these few acres of ground had seen since Hood had founded his empire of illusions. But it was not the patch she was watching. It was a congregation of floating lights, the same that Harvey had seen Hood feeding upon in the attic, which had been freed by the collapse of the house. They were now moving in a steady stream toward the lake. Come on. Yes. Wow. "The children's souls," she said, her voice growing thinner as she spoke the word. "Beautiful." Her body was no longer solid, Harvey saw. She was fading away in front of him. "Oh, no," he murmured. She took her eyes off the sky and stared down at her arms and the cat she was carrying in them. It, too, was growing insubstantial. "Look at us," Mrs. Griffin said, with a smile upon her weary face. "It feels so wonderful." But you're disappearing. I've lingered here far too long, sweet boy, she said. There were tears glistening on her face, but they were tears of joy, not of sadness. It's time to go. She kept stroking Stu Cat as they both faded from sight. You are the brightest soul I ever met, Harvey Swick, she said. Keep shining, won't you? Harvey wished he had some words to persuade her to stay a little while longer, but even if he'd had such words, he knew it would have been selfish to speak them. Mrs. Griffin had another life to go to, where every soul shone. Goodbye, child, she said. Wherever I go, I will speak of you with love. Then her ghostly form flickered out, leaving Harvey alone in the ruins. And that, my friends, concludes our chapter for this evening. Our reading for this evening. And I believe next week is it. We start on page 238. Yeah, that's it. We have 30 pages left, so we are going to finish The Thief of Always with our next reading. And then what? Shall we go back to Poe? Perhaps if I do go back to Poe, I could read them beforehand. Maybe skim them and see if there's words that we don't understand before we get into it. We'll figure it out. That is a problem for future Collie. In the meantime, I love you dearly. Thank you for being here, and stay spooky.